Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros Masterclass on Metrics That Matter, sponsored by the team at Brainshark. Really excited today to be joined by Melissa and John, both first-time MSP panelists. So for both of them, John and Melissa, as I mentioned in our prep, we've got a little bit of a tradition here on Modern Sales Pros. And John, we'll start with you. Any new hobbies or skills that you've picked up since the start of the coronavirus pandemic?
I have gotten into a little bit of woodworking, trying to keep myself busy, and I've been in my new house for about 6 or 7 months. So I figured if I'm going to do anything, I might as well be productive. So no baking bread, but I have been using the saw a little bit in the basement.
What have you made? Did you make the house yourself? Was that the woodworking project, or?
No, I didn't have that much time with having a new son and a full-time job. I made a couple shelves.
That's we all got to start somewhere. That's good. That's good. Woodworking. I don't actually think we've had anybody we've had 3D printing. I think that's as close as we've gotten to woodworking on MSP.
Small project.
And then Melissa as well. Anything that you've picked up since the start of the pandemic?
Yes, I actually started drawing. So what you're seeing behind me, these are my art pieces. And yeah, I just kind of discovered that I could do this about 3 months ago. And it's very soothing.
I bet. Super relaxing. And those are, how did you do those? You mentioned you said it was Sharpie, you said?
Yeah, it's with Sharpie. So I'll look up a picture that I like online and I'll draw all the dark, shady spots. And somehow it turns into that.
That's awesome. We've had, I think, bread baking, I think, was the most popular right at the beginning. And since then, the hobbies have gotten way more interesting as we're approaching the first year. So glad to hear that trend continues today with our two new panelists. And folks, we've got a lot to cover here today, so we're going to go ahead and jump into it. I just wanted to say a few words here. Today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. Those are folks that are in sales management, sales enablement, sales and revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our community members to answer the questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own, whether that's through pulling together world-class speakers like Melissa and John today to talk about metrics that matter, whether that's through our robust online forum, or at some point in time in the future when we can get back to in-person events, those as well. Everything we do is free for our community members, and those of you who aren't members that are on today, you'll be invited to join thereafter. But as I mentioned at the outset, today's session is sponsored by the team at Brainshark, and I'm going to hand it over to John to say just a few words about Brainshark. John?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Rich. So really quickly, the 500-foot view elevator pitch, where a comprehensive sales readiness platform incorporates a bunch of different facets there. So new hire onboarding, training, coaching, and then tying the whole story together with scorecards, basically to ensure that our reps and customer-facing teams are having really effective conversations when they are facing buyers.
Awesome. And thank you for that quick intro, John. But let's actually meet our speakers here. And John, let's get started with you and also mention where you're calling in from. We didn't talk about that in the beginning.
Sure. Yes. So I'm about 40 miles outside of Boston. So not having to have a commute this past year has been super helpful. I've been running the mid-market sales team at Brainshark for 3.5 years or so. So yeah, we've been doing this for a while, and I've been in SaaS leadership, I think, for about 7 years. So having a lot of fun, and it helps when you have a great team and, following the metrics that do matter, not every single one of them.
I love it. Excellent, John. We're excited to have you. And then Melissa?
I am on the east coast of Canada in New Brunswick, Fredericton, New Brunswick. I've been working with Introhive for the past 2 years in building up their sales enablement program, and starting a team here shortly as well. So it's been really exciting. I've been in the IT industry for about 14 years now, but loving it in Introhive.
This is great. And one of the nice parts about our panelists here today, folks, we have both kind of the practical, tactical science of it and the art of how to deploy training effectively to influence those metrics that matter. So really excited to have both John and Melissa here. Before we jump into today's content, just 2 housekeeping notes for everyone. First, please do use the question and answer panel. That's going to help us best moderate questions. It's going to allow our panelists to really give you the best bang for your buck in terms of answering those questions. And if John or Melissa wants to follow up afterwards as well, they may use that as an opportunity to start a conversation with you. Second, and before somebody puts it in the Q&A panel, this session is being recorded. The recording and the key takeaways will be available on the MSP previous events page on our YouTube channel, and then sent out to everyone as well, so you can forward that along to colleagues who maybe couldn't make it here today. But with that, John, Melissa, are you ready to jump into it?
Let's do it.
Oh, let's do it. Let's jump in here. So first, let's talk about some of the common pain points that organizations face. And I know this is a little bit like, how long is a piece of string? But John, you've been in the game for a while, and you've got a unique kind of where you sit at Brainshark. What are some of the common pain points that organizations face, and the metrics that you see that let you know what's going on?
Yeah, I think any sales leader will tell you, the goal is to create a predictable, scalable, repeatable revenue engine. But when you're either inheriting a brand new team, or you're starting off into, maybe it's a new vertical or a new segment, you need data to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. You know what I mean? So anybody can go into a new year, new quarter with a big target. You got $1 million number, how are you going to hit it? But you really need to kind of chunk that out and break down what exactly you need to do to get to that right side of the equation. What do you need to put into the revenue engine to make sure that we're getting the right conversations and we're getting to that close one business? So without the close one business, you need the pipeline, and without the pipeline, you need the activities. So it's really important to kind of break out and figure out who's being successful, what are they doing, and how do you repeat it?
I think that's a great point. Kind of begin with the end in mind, and then say, hey, we've got to get 600 cold calls or whatever it might be to get there.
Right.
And then
exactly right.
Melissa, once we've kind of got that, and we know, all right, this is the North Star we're heading towards, how does enablement tie in, or how does sales enablement tie in to make those goals, a reality?
Yeah, so the way that I look at it, the way that we do planning here is that we take that end goal and then we reverse engineer it. So we're trying to get to this place. What are the things we need to put in place? What's the system that needs to be in place so people have the knowledge, skills, and the attitude required to actually be successful in reaching those metrics? So where sales enablement comes in is, we do the plan to figure out how we're going to get there, and then we measure it all along the way. Is it working? Is it not working? What do we need to tweak? So back to John's point, we do this a lot as well, is looking at how successful reps are performing and what are they doing that's making them so successful. So we'll try to take that and repeat it or integrate it into our processes along the way to get to that end goal.
And that's interesting. And Melissa, I want to double click in on that. That's not just successful in terms of this is the top biller, right? This could be successful and they've got maybe the best conversion rate from demo to proposal, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like, let's say we have somebody who is consistent in a really high ASP. Why are they so consistent? How are they reaching that when other people are way down here? Like, how does that happen? So, I mean, we need to dig in. Are they focusing a lot on discovery? Are they really figuring out what the prospect needs, what they're looking for, and they're tailoring it and they're building that value story successfully so that, the client buys in and they see the value? Are other people that have a lower ASP maybe not doing that? Well, that's where sales enablement can jump in and, try to figure out how to make sure that we have that focus on discovery and everybody is following that method.
I love that. And if you can figure out how to replicate those really high ASP sales, Melissa, please do share it with everybody as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Well, John, I mean, I'd be remiss. We're talking about metrics. Everyone's got their favorite vanity metrics that they talk about. John, from the sales leader perspective and also where you sit at Brainshark, what are some of the vanity metrics that you're just like, I can't believe people still care about that?
I think this is, I guess, a big topic. I could probably talk the whole time about this one, but just activity, just the bucket of activity, not knowing exactly what necessarily that means. If I have a rep that's putting 500 emails into a sales off cadence, that takes 8 minutes of their day. On paper, they were busy, but, does that actually lead to revenue? Does that lead to getting in front of a buyer and having an effective conversation, right? So I think when people just look at the blanket activity metric, you got to really drill in there and understand what it is, because especially in a day and age now where you can report on literally everything, whether it's, you know, LinkedIn message, an email, you name it, you know, drilling in specifically, not just at the activity level and figuring out who's doing what's effective. You know, so I'm big on connecting, you know what I mean? It's one thing to go out and make, say, 100 calls a week, but how many are we actually having good conversations with, and what are we getting out of it? So I guess, long story short, if you just judge a rep based off of how busy they are or how busy they appear in a spreadsheet, it's definitely not telling the whole story.
Right. It's a part of the story, but it's not the whole story. Back to the sort of the teaching to the test, right? We want to drive behaviors that move the needle here. I think that's exactly great. Melissa, from the enablement side, have you encountered any vanity metrics where you're just like, you're not thinking about this the right way, John? Like, this is the wrong maybe metric that we should be focused on?
I don't think so. In all honesty, I haven't come across any myself in my career so far. The things that we'll track towards, I've focused a lot right now on onboarding because we're growing so much. So time to first sale, time to second sale. But the other thing that I really, really focus in on now, because the experience of the employee is so important in the onboarding process, the qualitative data that comes from that, surveying them after we've gone through the training, what can we do better? How can we change? What are we missing? That's been a huge focus for me lately. And it's like treasure getting that feedback and making those changes, because I'm trying to really instill here at Introhive that we've got this culture of continuous improvement. We want people to want the feedback so they can get better. Nobody's perfect, right? We want people to want that advice. So that's my end game right now.
Well, I think that's awesome. And I think there's a lot of organizations that pay, oh yeah, you know, we're a direct feedback, we're a coaching culture. And it turns out it's not that. What have you done to start to create that at Introhive? Because I think regardless of what the metrics are, if we're not honest about things, it's not worth a hill of beans.
That's right. That's right. So what we've done here is we're very, very transparent. Everybody knows the metrics that we're tracking towards. We have we have call recordings that we review as well. Sorry. And so people are all aware of that. We've instilled a coaching strategy as well at Introhive. So management has to go in and listen to call recordings, a certain amount per rep per week. They're discussed in one-on-ones. What can we do better? What did you do well? Right? You have to talk about positives too. But people are craving that feedback now because they want to do better. And that's a good feeling.
I think that's one of the things where when we think of conversations that happen in the MSP community, call coaching is always a very interesting area to get. It's a little uncomfortable listening to yourself. John, I want to actually ask you kind of similar question there. How do you foster this transparent metrics driven culture? I know it's a little bit aside from what we're talking about here today, but how do you do that with your org?
Yeah, and to Melissa's point, she mentioned that they're being completely transparent. And I think that starts, within team meetings and again, within one-on-ones, right? You know, we want to be completely transparent from the C-suite, all the way through to a frontline sales rep, understanding what's important and those things that we're tracking to hit and why we're doing it. Why are we doing what we're doing? What's the end result? And for us, it's delivering a great customer experience for our customers, right? So we certainly value, we measure our own success rather on the success of our customers. So, it's one thing to get a new logo through the door, but, making sure that they're fostered and helped out through implementation and for the life cycle that they're with us. That's what we're all about. So, I think when you lead with that example first, it's pretty effective because people can see we're really kind of sipping our own champagne in that regard.
I think that's a great point to make, where you say, okay, cool, the context is almost as important as the goal itself, and that helps get people, especially at a high growth startup, right? It's like, hey, we're doing this. Here's why. Here's what we think. Great points, y'all. And for our audience, please do use the Q&A panel. We have Melissa and John for about another half hour, 45 minutes. So if something starts to percolate, just throw that question in the Q&A panel and we'll be sure to get to it there. But let's take this one level deeper, right? We've talked kind of high level, some pain points that folks have. Let's talk about using some metrics to kind of identify areas for growth. And Melissa, you touched on this a little bit, but let's start with you. When you said, sales enablement, we help focus on, was it skills, knowledge, and attitude?
You got it.
I think you said, all right, skills, knowledge, and attitude there. how do you figure out how to deploy sales enablement against maybe each one of those, or how do you kind of crack that code?
Well, I go at it a bit scientifically. So we start with our overall enablement. I'm a nerd. We start up with our overall enablement plan, right? And then if people are deviating from it, if people aren't reaching their metrics, there's a deviation there, then we dig in. Okay, what do they need? What's required? Is it more coaching? Is it more training? What I like to emphasize here is training is not always the answer. You can throw a training module in front of someone, they can go through. It may not make a difference. It might, but it probably won't if you haven't done that discovery to figure out and dig in exactly what the issue is. I think when we had done our prep call, we said it's malpractice, right? If you're not diagnosing things correctly before you take action. So yeah, I would say, we make our plan, and then if people are deviating or not making, the metrics that we would like them to, then we have to figure out why. And we have to try to solve for that in sometimes some creative ways. Like, we know that when people are on meetings, if they have their camera on, it results in higher conversion rates. There could be a reason why people aren't turning their camera on, though, right? If people are at home, they're not really proud of where they're at, what room they're in, their background, they might not turn it on. So we're not going to know that unless we ask the questions.
I think that's great context for something even as simple as like a camera on. Like, hey, hold on, this isn't just a John, turn on your camera. There's more to it. There's more to it than that. John, as you think about your team and what you've seen at Brainshark, how do you start to use metrics to really identify areas that need remediation, whether it's sales enablement or a different script, whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think specifically for us at Brainshark, we like to always have a bench. We like to promote from within. So the very often track of an SDR becoming into an AE or some type of other closing role, we see all the time. So if I'm hiring a brand new AE, who spent maybe the last year being an SDR, they certainly know the front half of the sales cycle, but they might not know the back half. So I think it's a pretty good way to, we certainly wouldn't want to have these brand new folks go through negotiation classes 301 and 401 when they're, just making calls for the first time. So you kind of basically assess things, and when deals start progressing, you're not expected to know everything right away, but once we see certain deals or things getting stuck or where they're converting and where they're not, that's when we can prescribe some type of training, like Melissa was saying, around negotiation, or, we're not doing a great job of populating, say, a medic field. So maybe we breeze through discovery a little bit too quickly. So I'm obviously a big data dork. It kind of relates specifically to my organization and my role, but having a pool of data and giving it a sample size to look back and say, okay, things are falling off once we get to stage 3 here. What are we doing wrong? And really kind of prescribe what's going wrong.
It's back to that treatment without diagnosis is malpractice. I said it right. I was going to put it on a Post-it. No, I think that's an important part. And in one area too, and this is actually a registration question that's come in a few times, and I'm going to pose this towards Melissa. And when you think about measuring and thinking about the effectiveness of sales enablement, right? You roll out a new process, you roll out a new initiative. How can folks think about the effectiveness of the sales enablement? So I know that's probably a discussion in and of itself, a whole webinar, but I think it's important here, right? We're talking about identifying areas for growth. Sales enablement's a newer discipline to some organizations. How do you really go, it's working?
We have to measure it. Every piece of my plan has a goal, the impact it's going to have on the organization, and then how we're going to measure it and how often we're going to measure it, right? Because if it's not working, if we're teetering on a metric, or if we're not quite there across the board, chances are something is not working. We have to make a change. We have to tweak our strategy somehow. So yeah, I would say when you are implementing a new initiative, absolutely make sure you are able to measure it and be quick and agile in making those changes if it's not working.
Oh, I think that's such a, I actually like what you started with, like Yes, measure it. Like even that in and of itself, not just like, oh, we need sales enablement. Let's hire somebody. All right, Melissa, figure it out. No, it's really have a hypothesis, because there's more to do than there is time to do it all.
Absolutely.
No, and I think the other question, and John, I wanted to pose this one to you, and I guess this, no, actually well, I'll save this one for next. Let's advance here to our next topic, and I think this will come up naturally. Right. So we could have hit on this first point of using metrics to work towards your revenue goals here. John, let's start with you here. How do you set your team up, and how do you set your processes up for success in your organization?
Yeah, I think the first one is clear communication, making sure everyone knows what we're working on and why. But, if we were doing our job really well, the goal, I think, would be to have 80% or 90%, if you're having a really good quarter or year, to have your team be at 80% plus attainment. So it's metrics are super important, but I also think we also need to remember we can't really boil the ocean, for a lack of a better phrase. We can't look at everything all the time. So I think when you're trying to grow or improve or move the needle one way or the other, you need to really hone in on what specific metrics are going to be important for that. You can't do it all right away. Things take time, and you got to really kind of figure out which ones are more important and kind of prioritize in that way. So that's what the team and I try to do, whether it's, breaking into a vertical that we don't have a whole lot of success on, or, raising our ASP, quarter over quarter, and why. We really need to kind of chunk out what the problem is and figure out how to attack that problem specifically with a metric or two, not 80, even though we have access to them.
Yeah, and I want to just highlight something that John said there. You said at the beginning, right? If you're doing your job well as a revenue leader, 80% of your team is at 80% attainment. What is the implication of that? Make it clear for folks. I get it, and I know we had talked about it before, but like, why is that a good way to think about things as a sales leader?
Especially when scaling a team, it's one thing if you're, a frontline manager and you have 5 folks reporting to you, simple math is 80% to be 4 out of 5, right? But when you're scaling teams, there's no way in the history of any sales organization, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Rich, but not everyone's going to hit their number every single time. It doesn't happen, and you're going to have A players. They're going to kind of set it and forget it. They're rented talent. You enjoy them while they're here. You focus on your B's and C's and figure out how to get your C's up to B's and A's. And then, you really have a coaching conversation to figure out if you have the right hires for those folks that aren't performing. So I think if you're doing 80% of the job with 80% of your folks, you're in a great spot, and a lot of organizations aren't at that spot. 80% of 80% is really high. So like I said, getting back to the fact when you're scaling a team, you might have 50 reps reporting to you, or, a large sales organization got a few thousand. We're not all going to be firing all the time, even the best reps.
I think it's a great way to think about things, and it's also forces you to inspect a little bit further. Just because the team is at 100% or 110% doesn't mean that you're actually successful in that goal that John was just saying, right? You could have one person at 300% quota and everybody else is in the 30s. That's not successful. That's somebody who was maybe lucky, or a broken sales process. There's data to inspect there. And we haven't pulled on this in a while, John, but I think it was something like 30% or fewer of teams expect less than 50% of their team to achieve quota. It's like an insanely small number, which is just, quotas are set wrong if that's the case. Yeah. So I think that there's some other things that we can talk about here, right? When we think about, using metrics towards working towards your goals. Melissa, you hit on this a little bit before, but in sort of creating that transparent culture, what are some things that you've seen managers do? And I want John's perspective on this well, but what are some of the things that you've seen the managers at Introhive do to really make this feel very real for the folks that are on the line?
Well, I'm going to answer your question, but before we do that, my brain hurts from all these numbers you're throwing around. So from the manager side of things, they'll have a lot of team meetings and actually address, are we meeting this, and this? If we're not, what's our plan? Right? It's a lot of collaboration. We have a culture of collaboration and continuous improvement here at Introhive. Everybody's working towards the same purpose and are open to feedback. So I would say that would be one way, the managers meeting with their teams, the one-on-one coaching sessions that we've put in place as well. Everybody knows what is expected. I'm big on transparency. So we have pitch demo certifications that we do here at Introhive, and I've created a rubric. So everybody knows exactly what is required to get that perfect score, right? Any deviation, they know it's a lower score. So yeah, we've put a lot in place in order to foster that transparency, and it seems to be working so far, but we're always making changes, very agile here.
I think it's a great point, right? Lots of transparency, and also it does, your reps are relatively fluent too in the metrics that they have to achieve, right? There's no surprises with that, Melissa.
No, there isn't. They all know we're all working towards the same thing, and they'll ask for help. People have asked for extra coaching, and we provide it. We're trying to give them exactly what they need to be successful. Because when you look at adult learning, that's a huge piece of it, right? Adults don't want the fluff. They just want to know how to get it done. We're going to support them in doing that.
I think that's a great point. No fluff, right? Just give me what I need to get done. John, you had started to talk about this a little bit before, but any advice that you can give to leaders on the phone? Just, hey, this is how we can really make it clear and make it obvious for folks.
Yeah, and I think specifically too, when everything kind of hit the fan about a year ago, we asked a lot of our sellers to do things that they weren't normally doing, right? There certainly are field-based sales teams, but my team wasn't. For the most part, we were in the office all the time. So to Melissa's point about being completely transparent with what the expectations are, it's tenfold now when everybody's at their home office. So, we're very communicative, we're using Slack channels, all that good stuff. But I think another piece that we could talk about probably for another NIRE session is just leading with empathy. You know what I mean? And not even specifically with our sales teams, understanding the scenarios of what our prospects and customers are going through. So it's a little deviated from the metric piece, but I think going back, I guess, to the metric piece, you always know that there's that one rep that's always on the phone. Anytime you walk on the sales floor, you hear them. We don't have that anymore. So we kind of do need to do a bit more inspection through, a number of different tools or Salesforce or what have you. So, making sure that once we went completely remote, we pivoted to say, listen, these are going to be what's expected of you, weekly, daily, hit them however you need to hit them, and obviously reach out and let us know how we can help. Selling's a team sport, and it's certainly not just on the rep. It's on myself, leadership, sales enablement, and everybody. So it forced us to get a little bit out of our comfort zone, but I think we've actually grown a lot.
Yeah, I think the best, I think one of the best pieces of advice that we've had in MSP is we're going to make it through this. It's how we make it through it that matters. And that lead with empathy point comes up quite a bit. One other part that's often forgotten in that context of like empathy and understanding and all of that, especially if you're leading junior folks. I think of your SDR managers that may be on the call today, or folks leading high volume inside sales teams. Do make sure that things like the workstation is set up appropriately. Make sure if they're supposed to have an external monitor that it's set up, and inspect that. Literally have them text you a picture of it, as my team can attest. When they got their workstation set up, it was like, okay, let me see. It's like the big unveil. But those are the things that pros like Melissa, John, myself maybe take for granted, that we know how to set our space up to be productive. It's a huge thing that can drive way more effectiveness, and you can't inspect that anymore. They're just like, I can't say, John, what did you just say on that discovery call, John? That's not the way we talk about things. So you really a little bit prescriptive, but also leading with a ton of empathy. Excuse me. All right, let's move on to our last point here. And we've got some questions coming in, which is great. Let's talk a little bit more about sort of some tangible ways to get to some effective results here, right? Using metrics that matter. Let's do this to get somewhere good. Thinking about, and I know we touched on this a little bit, like sales enablement, pretty tough to measure. John, how can folks get started with this? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think once you have the metrics identified, it's pretty hard to do this on your own, unless you want to ask sales ops to pull you every single report that they can. Specifically with Brainshark, we can do it really quickly in 30 seconds with our scorecarding. But I think the biggest one is defining those metrics, like I said, and then trying to find a way to have a repository for everything to piece it all together. It's very difficult. So I think you really need to have someone that can definitely help you in sales ops. If not, have a platform that's a sales readiness platform, and someone like Melissa being able to help assist and pull things out of there to figure out where we stand, what's our baseline, and where do we want to go.
Yeah, all great points. And I know, Melissa, you touched on this a little bit before, but let's double click in here. Is there an easy way or an easy way that you've seen amongst your peer group to really say, hey, this is how we know we're driving effective results in terms of these metrics?
I'm not sure there's an easy way, but what I would say is, like I mentioned before, when we have our initiatives in sales enablement and we've got that goal, the impact, and the measurement identified, that measurement is critical. If we think this action that we're putting in place, let's say the pitch demo certifications, if we think that's going to increase our deal velocity, we need to monitor that and see if it's having an impact, right? So it's that constant monitoring of the measurements. And I think, it's not a direct link to sales enablement, but it's kind of fuzzy, but it's there. It's a way to measure and see if what you're doing is actually having the impact that you had wanted it to.
I think that's a great point. All right, folks, we got a bunch of questions that came in both during registration and live in here, and we're going to go back and forth throughout. So first question, let's start with you on this, John, is what is one metric that the whole company can get behind besides revenue?
Meetings. I think meetings, virtual meetings are, we have a button in Salesforce that says in-person meetings. We haven't really used that one in quite some time, but I think my big things when I, have anyone new starting for me, or, we're talking about what we should be doing as salespeople, it's spending your time in front of a buyer or trying to spend your time in front of a buyer. So if those meetings aren't happening, what are we doing to put ourselves in a position to be in front of a buyer? And I think the best, easiest, simplest one metric to do that is meetings. Are we actually meeting or are we not?
Love it. Are we getting in front of people or doing things to get in front of people? That's right. I use the air quotes now. Melissa, what do you think on that? Is there one metric that an organization can get behind, other than revenue?
Yes. And I think it's the ENPS. I think we need to take care of our internal staff members first and foremost, right? Because people are in high demand now, and you want people to stay with you. So that culture piece is extremely important. And we've worked really, really hard to make sure that we've got a great culture here at Introhive. And I think for that reason, we maintain and retain a lot of people. So I would say that's crazy important. Crazy.
In ENPS, sorry for the guy who just threw all the metrics out there. ENPS, that's like a qualitative how the employees are doing kind of metric?
Yeah, it's the Employee Net Promoter Score, I believe the acronym stands for.
Excellent. All right, that's great. All right. Hey, John, I'm going to throw this one to you. Do you have a favorite tool for, this is a question from Barry, a live question here. John, do you have a favorite tool for creating sales team dashboards?
Oh, I mean, selfishly, I'd say our own. We actually do have a pretty nifty scorecard to give a really single one pane of glass to have everybody on your team show what they're doing, revenue based and not, pipeline, things like that. But yeah, my favorite tool would be our head of sales operations.
No, I think that's sales operations can solve a lot of tooling problems for you with usually Google Sheets, I think, is where most stuff ends up these days. John, I'm actually going to throw one more at you, and this is more of a tactical sales question. When you think about, proofs of concepts, what are you doing to track POCs? How are you measuring kind of the success of them in the context of the sales funnel?
Yeah, I think we have a really, I wouldn't say rigorous is the word, but we definitely do have some kind of guidelines when we do turn on a POC site. There is some skin in the game, right? We're allowing people access to a site, any SaaS platform, there's folks that are working on it behind the scenes. So we want to, when we're doing our discovery or having those conversations, we get to the point where someone wants a proof of concept or a trial or a pilot or whatever flavor you want to call it. We need to understand what the success criteria is. Okay, we're happy to go in and do that, but how do we validate that you guys are going to feel successful when we go through this? What's important to you as it relates to the UI, functionality, things like that. So we keep kind of a mutual success plan that we kind of hold both of each other accountable on to make sure that we're hitting those gates successfully and that we know what the clear next defined steps are. So I guess the way that we use that mutual success plan is based on how long the proof of concept would be. So we can tighten up those steps or widen them out depending on the length. But I think one thing that we found to be critically successful is that mutual success plan, because it is mutual. We want the customer to own piece of the process just like we do.
I think that's a great answer. The only other part I would add to that is just make sure that you're tracking that as well, because John was mentioning, right, what does customer lifetime value look like? If you're spending time doing a POC, is that a customer that ends up closing at a higher deal size? Do they, maybe it takes longer to close, but they end up renewing sooner?
Mm-hmm.
They end up having a higher retention rate. They end up being a better advocate for you. There's so many things that are important in that. And John hit on a bunch as well, but make sure that you're tracking it fundamentally. As a recovering sales engineering leader, it also helps us plan capacity, which if you've ever tried to hire sales engineers, good luck. That's my own 2 cents on that one. Melissa, there were a bunch of questions actually that came in during registration, and I think it's great that we have both a sales enablement leader and a sales leader on the call. What are some of the ways that a sales leader can best work with somebody in your position of sales enablement? What are some things that you can...
Like in a perfect world?
Yeah, it's a perfect world. Everybody in MS, they're going to start doing it tomorrow. No, but what can sales leaders do that can kind of set you up for better success?
Well, we have a system that's kind of organic, but I have a really good relationship with the sales leadership here at Introhive. And when they're listening to call recordings, or when they're sitting in on calls, or if they're in team meetings, and they come across a topic that maybe sales enablement could help with, or they come across an issue and they're trying to figure out how they can address it, they'll feed it to me and I'll try to come up with a way to resolve it. I'll dig in, I'll do my own kind of discovery on the enablement side and try to solution for the issue or the topic that they bring forward. So they're the feeder system to sales enablement, and I welcome that. So yeah. I would say, I don't know if that's not normal in an organization, but we're very close, and they feed me this stuff all the time.
Close relationship is certainly important. John, same question, but an opposite, right? As a sales leader, what would you wish sales enablement would do to better set you up for success or make your life easier, aside from more leads and revenue?
Yeah, what we're doing now at Brainshark, I think, is working really well for us. So our sales enablement folks are kind of in the seat right next to coaches. They ride along for a lot of deals. So I think the simplest thing is to make sure that you have an open line of communication and a one-on-one, or huddles with whoever those sales enablement folks are, because it's one thing for you to understand who's doing well on paper. And if you're just going to be a spreadsheet jockey and look at your metrics, you're going to know that rep A is up here, rep B is right here, and rep D is down here. But rep D might have some really great ways of attacking prospecting. You know what I mean? So I think you need to make sure you highlight where you might think that, this rep is good at this thing, but you got to compare notes. You know what I mean? It's always good to have a few more people assessing a problem, or even maybe a great rep. They are great, but hey, once we get to this point, I find that they fumble when they hear X. So I think what we do, like I said, is, one-on-ones weekly. And we might highlight a rep to pick on, not pick on, I guess, but let's highlight these few folks to, we're really struggling here. Like, what do you think's going wrong? Because I can't figure this one out. So, yeah, just making sure you keep that line of communication open and understand that, we're all on the same team.
And aligning on the metrics and what we think the programs are and the processes are. It goes without saying, but I need to restate that. As we know, the MSP community has kind of a spectrum of organization sizes, and sales leaders that are at high growth companies, sales leaders that are at bigger organizations. Melissa, what are some metrics that you view as critical for a growing team to track? What are some ones that you think are important that maybe folks wouldn't think of off the bat?
Like I kind of chatted about them before, but for me, for a growing team, like we've hired so many people in the past couple of months, and I've been onboarding like crazy. So for me, it's really, really important to measure the effectiveness of the onboarding program. So it's that time to first sale, time to second sale, those kind of initial metrics, and then also the qualitative feedback. I want to make sure that we're doing a good job and people are happy. So yeah, I would say those three would be the ones that I'd be focused on for people who are joining in a high growth mode.
I think that those are all great. We've heard certainly the time to first sale, time to second sale, time to late stage prospect, and all of that. That's great. And then, John, anything else that you've seen as you've grown and as Brainshark's grown?
Yeah, from more of a 10,000 foot view, I think a really important one, not specifically drilling into a rep and their activity and their pipeline and their quota coverage, is the ratio of that lifetime value over customer acquisition cost. We found when you kind of segment that out, either by rep, by team, you can really highlight who's doing a better job than others and what's going right or what's going wrong. You certainly want your lifetime value of your customer to be a lot bigger than the acquisition cost. So depending on the team, the selling motion, inside, outside, mid-market, enterprise, small business, it's important. So I think that's a really good one.
Yeah, and another one just on that front, John, I love that. Another one to look at is your churn rate and your revenue retention per sales rep. That is a way to identify if you've got a rep who's just ramming deals through the door and they're high ASP, but you don't understand that they're churning afterwards. My girlfriend's in customer success, so it's one that we've actually spent a lot of time talking about, but it's a cool metric. And it encapsulates a lot of, John, what you're hitting on with the lifetime value component. But that churn rate, it's like, hold on. Every deal that John's bringing in here, it seems good on paper, but my goodness, they don't stick around, or we put a hell of a lot of services behind them to make them successful.
Yeah, fill in a leaky bucket.
Yeah, exactly. Melissa, we have a live question here coming in from Mike Klein. And I certainly have some perspective on this as well, but I'd love you to get started with this. Is, what's the ratio that you've seen organizations be successful with of sales enablement to sellers in an organization?
This is a great question. I am the only sales enablement person at Introhive, and I would love to have a couple more if anybody. But yeah, the ideal ratio of sales enablement staff to sellers, in all honesty, I went through my enablement plan for last year and this year, and I graded myself as the only sales enablement person because I'm the type of person who wants to be at least 80% all of the time. A little bit of a perfectionist. But, I went through and I wasn't really happy with how I fared. I think it was the lowest grade I've ever received in my life, and I'd given it to myself. So I'm not sure. We've got about 70, 60 salespeople here, including the SDRs and the solutions engineers here at Introhive, and there's one of me. I would say if it was like 1 to 20, maybe, that would be ideal, because then you can have somebody putting the strategy in place, and you can have somebody doing the enablement, and you can have a specific sales coach taking on that side of things as well. Yeah, that would be my pie in the sky scenario.
I think as Julie Greenfield from Brainshark has said a few times, it should be like, as soon as you hire a salesperson, you should hire sales enablement. I think that's aspirational. What our data has shown on this, Melissa, you're not far off. We surveyed the MSP community on this, and it was around 50 folks in the revenue org is about when you see sales enablement as a standalone discipline show up. Before then, you start to see operations or sales engineering, product marketing. It's kind of like takes a village to get sales enablement off the ground. I think the perspective and what we're starting to see a lot more of in MSP is that sales enablement is moving into revenue enablement, much like sales operations became revenue operations. It went from being you're a sales coach and you build onboarding to you are now a strategic business differentiator for customer success, account management, sales development, solutions, and so on. So hopefully that ratio will be not as 1 to 70 is insane. Maybe it's 1 to 20, 1 to 25.
I like it.
Yeah, and I think, John, what were you seeing at Brainshark as well for this kind of, what's the golden ratio?
I was going to say right around that 20 to 1, I think, or 1 to 20, I guess, which way you look at it. But so where I run mid-market sales, we're working with smaller customers. So to Melissa's point, it's tough. You're stretched pretty thin. So there's plenty of things out there, and Brainshark's created a lot of resources and assets too. Tips for the solo enabler or the NOLO enabler. To your point, Rich, I'm a product marketing manager and I'm going to be owning this new platform or this strategy or whatever. It's hard. It's really hard. So there are some ways that we can help, but I think 20 to 1 is probably fair, because to Melissa's point too, when you scale, you can have someone focus on strategy, someone can be your in the field coach, someone can be focusing on the program, someone can be focusing on the tools. So there's plenty to go around, and I'm sure, Melissa, that you're very busy.
Yeah.
70 to 1. It feels like a lot.
I have to give a shout out to Brainshark. They do have great resources that I have used myself.
I think there's the interesting question on this then becomes, and we've already got this question comes in, like, how do you justify adding more, right? And that is, I think, a bit of a how long is a piece of string question. What's important with that is you need to be able to, back to kind of what we've been talking about today, really have proven that you are leveraged in a way where you're adding value, you're driving either it's top line metric growth or success, or you're accelerating certain metrics. It's not just okay, cool, it's 70 to 1, we need to hire 2 more because that's the ratio. It's hey, we've delivered this much impact, I can't do project X, Y, and Z. If I could do those, the hypothesis is it will increase this conversion ratio, right? It'll affect the metric that matters in such a way that that person justifies their own cost. I think the other part on this too, Mike, and I'm not sure if this is helpful for you, we can be sure we share it afterwards. Harvard Business Review 2 years ago had a study where they looked at revenue generating roles versus revenue supporting roles. Now that's a really broad generalization, but it's essentially, are you a quota carrier or are you supporting quota carriers? So are you a sales or an account manager, or are you in sales enablement, operations, sales engineering, and so on? And I think that they found that it was like in every business across all the study that they did, it was 17 to 1 is what you would end up with. So if you look at sales operations, sales enablement, sales engineering, let's call those the big 3, it's not a clear, like, we'll hire 3 to 1 or whatever it might be. John, actually, I want to bring it back to metrics now. This great conversation here. What are some of the metrics that you're thinking about that maybe are more important now that we're fully remote, or as we go into 2021, that maybe you weren't thinking about before?
Yeah, I still think the biggest one, I mean, the ones that are the most important, I think, specifically now that we're remote, is going to be based on conversion rates. Because I think things are stalling, or there's a lot more reasons why things are stalling now, I think, than before. There's the pandemic, obviously saying, we don't have any money, or we can't do anything, or we're not going to be seeing customers, so why would we be looking at X or Y? So I think conversion rates at certain stages are critically important, because that was one that we could kind of fumble through together in the office. But now, where we're seeing the big gap in certain stages, it's really important to have those conversations, because you really need to make sure that you're inspecting this stuff, more so with a fine-tooth comb than just say, oh, Johnny Rep hit his activity for the week, we're all set, but peel that back and understand, where are we dropping off? And if there's a way that we can upskill some other folks that aren't doing as poorly, how do we do that? So I think that would be the biggest one for me now that we're fully remote.
It seems like too, with some of the things that you said, like those are applicable, whether it's and maybe even more applicable if it's a field seller that's now
right.
fully remote and can't travel, right? Are they actually hitting the conversion rate goals and the meeting goals that we need now that they can't just go play, 36 holes or whatever field sellers were doing before the pandemic? So I love it. All right, folks. Well, we're gonna wrap up here. John and Melissa, thank you so much for your time. Before we wrap and wind everything down, one key takeaway, one thing, maybe tweet length that you want everybody to go home with today. Give you a second to think about that. And let's start with
me. I think everybody in sales has to own the number. You know what I mean? So there's certain metrics that go into hitting that, but we all need to be accountable. And like I said before, it's a team sport. It takes leadership, it takes enablement, it takes skill, and it takes will. So it's really important to understand those metrics that matter, but at the same time, own your number, own your pipeline, and own those metrics.
I love it. I love it. I think it's such a great point, and be fluent in them too, right? Know what you got to do to get to where you need to get to. And last but certainly not least, Melissa, any key takeaways for our audience here today?
What I like to say to our sales team is, we're striving for progress, not perfection. Perfection is the barrier to progress, isn't it? I think Winston Churchill said that. If
Sounds good to me.
If you're perfect, you're not going to want to get better. There's no reason. So we need to strive for that progress, that continuous improvement, and be open to it and want it.
Those are great, great points, John and Melissa. On behalf of the team behind the scenes, everybody in the Modern Sales Pros community, I know you're both incredibly busy. Thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise here today. I hope you all have a safe and wonderful rest of your day. Take care, y'all. Thank you again.
Thank you.